Guys, if you haven't heard about Anchor, it is literally the easiest way possible to make a podcast. Let me explain. First of all, it's free, and there are many creation tools on top of it being free that allow you to record and edit your very own podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many more podcast outlets. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. Let me stress that again. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started today. Hey guys, welcome to episode number 10 of the Athletes in Adversity podcast. Today we'll be breaking down the top 10 Stanley Cup finals in NHL history. So with that, make sure to go follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and subscribe to my YouTube channel, all at Athletes in Adversity, as well as my Twitter at AthletesPod. Also go support the show for as little as 99 cents a month right on anchor.fm. Or if you want to be more generous, go pledge up to $50 a month on my Patreon, Athletes in Adversity. So with that, let's get today's show started. So let's get started right away with number 10 on the list, the 2001 Stanley Cup Final between the Colorado Avalanche and the New Jersey Devils. The Devils at the time were the defending champions, and this series also featured an amazing battle between all-time great goaltenders Martin Brodeur and Patrick Roy. Prior to this, Brodeur had won 2 cups and Roy had captured 3. Roy was the all-time wins leader, and Brodeur eventually would beat him in that. The first 4 games were a split, each winning once on the opponent's ice. In Game 5 at Colorado, the Devils won 4-1, setting up a chance to clinch back home in Game 6. But in this last hurrah of his career, Roy gave up just 1 goal in the final 2 games as the Avalanche came from behind to defeat the Devils and win the series in 7 games. This matchup is also remembered for the defenseman Ray Bourque finally winning the Cup after 22 seasons, although he had to leave Boston and come to Denver to do it. So let's go all the way back to 1994 with number 9 on the list, the New York Rangers versus the Vancouver Canucks in the 1994 Stanley Cup Final. This was the Rangers' only Stanley Cup winning season since 1940, and it was a dramatic final that went to 7 games. After taking a 3-1 lead, New York let Vancouver back into the series by losing Game 5 at home and Game 6 on the road. While getting hammered by 3 goals in each game, while team leader Mark Messier had guaranteed a win in Game 6 of the Eastern Conference Finals against the New Jersey Devils, he did not do the same for Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals. However, he could, as he scored the title-clinching goal in the second period of a 3-2 win for the Rangers in the Stanley Cup Final. 1994 Stanley Cup Final, remembered as one of the best of all time. So let's go to number 8 on the list, the 2003 Stanley Cup Final between the New Jersey Devils and the Mighty Ducks of Anaheim. Yes, that was actually the team name at the time for the Anaheim Ducks, and they received an historic performance from the goaltender Jean-Sébastien Giguère on the way to the Game 7 of the finals against Brodeur and the Devils. Home ice meant everything in the series as New Jersey shut out Anaheim in both Game 1 and Game 2 at home before the Ducks returned the favor by winning both Game 3 and Game 4 at home in overtime. The Devils won Game 5 and the Ducks won Game 6 to set up the ultimate event in sports, a Game 7. Anaheim finally ran out of gas as Brodeur delivered his 3rd shutout of the finals and clinched New Jersey the 3rd cup in 9 seasons. The Ducks' consolation was Giguère's Conn Smythe recognition, but the Devils got Lord Stanley himself the Stanley Cup. Number 7 on the list is the Edmonton Oilers versus the Philadelphia Flyers in the 1987 Stanley Cup Final. For the second time in 3 seasons, the Oilers and Flyers went at it in the Cup Finals. This was the only time in his 4 Stanley Cup winning seasons that Wayne Gretzky was pushed to a 7th game in the championship round. The Great One had 11 points in 7 games, as Edmonton won its 3rd Stanley Cup, but it wasn't easy. After the Oilers took a 3-1 series lead, the Flyers fought back in Game 5 on the road and Game 6 at home, with a narrow 1-goal victories to even the series at 3, to force in Game 7 in Edmonton. The gritty Oilers took care of business, winning 3-1 in Game 7, and Gretzky would win his 4th cup the following year. Number 6 on my list, I have the 2011 Stanley Cup Finals between the Boston Bruins and the Vancouver Canucks. This is the most recent entry on the list. This one stands out for sheer competitiveness. This was a series that went 7 games. The Canucks won 3 one-goal games to take a series lead 3-2 going into Game 6 in Boston. The Bruins would not be denied in Game 6, however, winning it at home in blowout fashion, and then going to Vancouver in Game 7, looking to end the Vancouver Canucks season. Boston would win Game 7 4-0 on the road and left no doubt which team was the best one on the ice in the series. Despite Vancouver's regular season dominance that earned it the President's Trophy, you'll notice that the Canucks appeared twice on this list, losing 2 very memorable Stanley Cup Finals, and in fact they have yet to win one since. Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying today's episode of the Athletes in Adversity podcast. Make sure to go follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and subscribe to my YouTube channel, all at Athletes in Adversity, as well as my Twitter at AthletesPod. Also, go support the show for as little as 99 cents a month right on Anchor.fm. Or if you want to be more generous, go pledge up to $50 a month and receive exclusive benefits on my Patreon, Athletes in Adversity. So with that, let's continue today's episode. The 1971 Stanley Cup Finals come in at number 5 on the list between the Montreal Canadiens and the Chicago Blackhawks. The Chicago franchise didn't change its team nickname to one word until 1986. So these were the old school Chicago boys from the original Six era, and they ran into the most amazing goalkeeping wonderkind ever in rookie Ken Dryden. He won the Conn Smythe before he won the Calder Trophy, given to the best rookie. Think about that for a moment. Dryden had just 6 regular season starts under his belt when he led his Montreal teammates to the first of 6 Stanley Cups they would win in the 1970s, and he did it by winning Game 7 on the road in Chicago after the home team had won every game of the series up to that point. The 2009 Stanley Cup Finals come in at number 4 on the list between the Pittsburgh Penguins and the Detroit Red Wings. The Wings were the defending champions, having beaten the Pens in 6 games the previous year in the finals. It was another series where the home team won every game until Game 7. When Pittsburgh stuck it to Hockeytown, winning 2-1 thanks to one of the most famous last-second saves in Stanley Cup Finals history by Penguins goalie Marc-Andre Fleury, Pittsburgh won Game 6 at home and Game 7 on the road by identical 2-1 scores, as Fleury came up huge against Detroit, gunning for its 5th cup in 12 seasons. The Red Wings have not been back to the finals since the postseason. Meanwhile, Fleury won 2 more cups with the Penguins in 2016 and 2017. The top 3 entries on this list are from the 1950s and the 1940s, so let's start with number 3. The 1954 Stanley Cup Final between the Detroit Red Wings and the Montreal Canadiens. This is the most recent time that the finals went to a Game 7 overtime scenario. The single greatest moment in all of professional sports. It's a shame it hasn't happened more often. In truth, the Wings took a 3-1 series lead only to watch the Canadiens fight back with impressive defensive performances in both Game 5 and Game 6 to set up Game 7 in Hockeytown. Detroit had legendary goaltender Terry Shuckuk in net, and perhaps that was all they needed in a winner-take-all situation like this. Fittingly, it was a somewhat fluky goal that handed Detroit the cup win, as left wing Tony Leswick centered the puck in the Red Wings offensive zone before Montreal defenseman Doug Harvey ended up deflecting it into his own net. Sometimes you'd rather be lucky than good. Number 2 on this list is the 1942 Stanley Cup Finals between the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Detroit Red Wings. A few things stand out about this series. First, Detroit had posted a terrible 19-24-4 record in the regular season, but the Red Wings found themselves on the verge of winning the cup anyway. Second, for decades, this was the only North American professional sports playoff series that saw a team overcome a 3-0 deficit to win 4 straight times. That's what the Leafs did here to deny the Wings a championship. Detroit won the first 3 games of the series, holding Toronto to just 6 goals combined in those 3 victories. Then, the Leafs woke up, scoring 19 times in the final 4 matchups to win the Cup. Toronto's 3-1 victory in Game 7 sealed the deal. Ironically, just 3 years later, the Maple Leafs would almost blow a 3-0 lead in the Cup Finals to Detroit, but they ended up winning Game 7 to deny the Red Wings their own piece of history. And finally, number 1 on the list, the 1950 Stanley Cup Finals between the Detroit Red Wings once again and the New York Rangers. You can see why the Red Wings call their home a Detroit hockey town, as the Red Wings took part in 4 of the most memorable Stanley Cup Finals in history. The series that tops the list because Game 7 went into double overtime. Imagine being back then and a fan in the stadium, or of both teams in general, and it goes to double overtime in Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals. You'd be a complete wreck with so much anxiety, knowing either heaven or hell could just be a few seconds away. In this one, Detroit took a 2-1 series lead before the underdog New York won both Game 4 and Game 5 in overtime. That forced the Red Wings to win Game 6, which they did by a score of 5-4. Bringing on Game 7, it was tied 3-3 at the end of regulation in the first 20-minute extra session, and then 8:31 into the second overtime, Detroit left wing Pete Babano backhanded a shot past Hall of Fame goalie Chuck Rayner to win the Cup for the Red Wings. It just doesn't get any better than that. Game 7, double overtime, Stanley Cup Finals. Hey guys, thank you all for listening to today's episode of the Athletes in Adversity podcast. Make sure to go follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and subscribe to my YouTube channel, all at Athletes in Adversity, as well as my Twitter at AthletesPod. Also, go support the show for as little as 99 cents a month right on Anchor.fm. Or if you want to be more generous, go pledge up to $50 a month on my Patreon, Athletes in Adversity. So with that, we're going to end the show today. I hope you all enjoyed it. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you for listening to the Athletes in Adversity podcast.